Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Today we're going to dive into a world where we can have network engineers and businesses decouple themselves from the hardware and actually find more value and still have that performance without losing any of that performance. And we're talking about white box Wi-Fi with Mojo Networks. And so to drive this conversation, I am your host, Roel Dionisio, and our co-host, who is remotely with us in Canada, Francois Vergès. How are you, Francois?
I'm good, Roel. I'm actually in Chicago this week.
Oh, Chicago, that's right. You're training. So you're in the US side this time.
Yeah.
And I'm actually here at the Mojo Networks office with Rick Wilmer. How are you doing, Rick?
I'm doing great.
Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody on the show? So if anyone who doesn't know who you are, why don't you talk about yourself?
I'm Rick Wilmer. I'm the CEO of Mojo Networks. I've been with this company about 3.5 years, but I've been in the Wi-Fi industry since the very, very early days. I was an early employee at another Wi-Fi company back in the early 2000s when this whole industry was born, and was there when that company went public, and have been intrigued with this technology and this industry for the last 15 years now.
Awesome. And how did you get into Wi-Fi?
That's a good story. I was originally in my career, I was in the hard drive industry in data storage, and spent a lot of time in engineering roles and operational roles, manufacturing. And the hard drive industry got commoditized, and it became a brutal marketplace to compete in. When you have a very technically complex product that becomes a commodity, it's really difficult to prosper. There was a lot of layoffs and acquisitions and consolidation in that industry. And after I'd laid off literally thousands of people, I'd had enough and made a decision to get out of the hard drive industry into an industry where there was hardware, because I enjoyed hardware and where there was differentiation, and made a conscious decision to jump to networking in the early 2000s. And my first opportunity was at a CPE company, and then I was at a core router company, and then made my way into the Wi-Fi industry after that.
Awesome. So here you are at Mojo Networks. And so the first thing that I want to ask you is, what is cognitive Wi-Fi? Because that's very upfront whenever you visit Mojo Networks or you hear about Mojo Networks.
Yeah, cognitive Wi-Fi is essentially collecting a massive amount of data from a network or from a bunch of networks, and then using that data to predict what the network is going to do next. And if it's going to do something that's going to negatively impact user experience, we do everything possible to automatically remediate that problem fast enough so that a user never notices that we're about to have a problem.
Awesome. And so going into the discussion of white box Wi-Fi, how does that relate to white box Wi-Fi? And then we'll go into what is white box Wi-Fi. Okay,
so the two are loosely coupled, and white box Wi-Fi, let me step back. Cognitive Wi-Fi works better the more data that we ingest into our system. The underpinnings of cognitive Wi-Fi are big data. We run a Hadoop platform in the cloud, and we store massive amounts of data, and we apply machine learning to that data to help automatically remediate problems with user experience. Now, machine learning works better and learns faster with more data. White box Wi-Fi drives the cost of enterprise Wi-Fi down. And typically in any market, as the cost of the solution goes down, the volumes go up. And we've seen our company grow rapidly. We're about to ship our 500,000th access point here very soon. And since I've been here in the last 3 years or so, we've probably shipped 300,000 plus of those 500,000, even though the company's now coming up on 14 years old. So our growth has really accelerated. And the more APs that are out there, the more data we're ingesting into our big data platform, and it's feeding our machine learning algorithms, so our machines are learning faster. Mm-hmm. So that's the tie-in between white box Wi-Fi and cognitive Wi-Fi.
Okay, so that's a good transition then to talk about white box Wi-Fi, because I see where you guys are going with the machine learning, the AI, the whole management platform of access points. For somebody that doesn't know what this is, how would you describe what white box Wi-Fi is to them?
Okay, so let me step back a little bit into my history in the industry and then some of the inspiration for this. When I first entered the Wi-Fi industry, I was running an engineering group, and we were responsible, among many things, for designing and putting new access points into production and then delivering those to our enterprise customers. That was a hard engineering job. We had a lot of hardware engineers, RF engineers. We had a huge capital budget invested into Faraday cages and capital equipment to test RF performance. We were releasing empty buildings to go test APs in clean air. It was a huge part of our engineering budget. When I joined Mojo, we had no hardware engineers, no RF engineers, and we're putting very competitive high-performance access points into the market. And I'm scratching my head wondering how this is possible. Well, what I'd realized is to go back on that story, I had been out of the Wi-Fi industry from my first company until Mojo for about 5 years. And during that 5-year window is when this capability of putting really competitive access points into the market without a ton of hardware and RF engineers seemed to have happened. So what I realized is that over time, the amount of functionality and features and software capability that has been migrated into the chipset has been remarkable. The innovation that's happened at Qualcomm and Broadcom and other Wi-Fi chipset vendors has been spectacular. They've put a lot of features that we used to implement discreetly, and they've provided a lot of code in the form of an SDK that we develop on that has made really now an enterprise-grade access point largely defined by the chipset and the code that comes along with it from a chip vendor like Qualcomm or Broadcom. The other thing that's happened is the companies that design and manufacture access points, they all tend to be headquartered in Taiwan with factories in China. There's about 6 or 7 that manufacture 95% of the world's enterprise-grade access points. All the big enterprise Wi-Fi vendors like Mojo and our competitors all use the same 6 or 7 in Taiwan, and they've matured. They've become very capable at designing the periphery of an access point around the reference design board that comes from Qualcomm or Broadcom. Some of them own their own antenna companies. They're all ISO certified. They're very mature and professional from a manufacturing standpoint. So the whole industry's matured a lot, where you've seen this hardware ecosystem for building access points, the ODMs together with the chipset guys create a system that really works very, very well now. The other thing that I was paying attention to, in addition to that trend of this transition of design value add moving out of the Wi-Fi vendors and into the chipset vendors, as well as the ODMs, was this hyperscale guys like Amazon, Google, Facebook, scaling out these massive data centers with a ton of compute, storage, and networking, and doing it in their own way without relying on these big vendors like people had historically. Mm-hmm. And that's when I stumbled onto the Open Compute project. And when I boiled it all down, at least the conclusion I reached, which may not be completely accurate, is that the hyperscale guys were spending so much money on data center infrastructure, particularly servers, that they got frustrated with the cost of servers. And they were paying for those servers from your traditional server vendors that we know who those people are. And they said, the innovation in a server has really become concentrated in the x86 microprocessor. That's where the value is. Intel is the innovator. They're creating the value. You, Mr. Server Vendor, that are wrapping some management software around that x86 microprocessor really aren't doing that much, and you don't justify the margins that you've been charging us. Well, they didn't get satisfaction as a result of that argument, so they took matters into their own hands, and they decided to design their own servers. And with the advent of open source software, they could download a Linux operating system onto a platform that was based on an x86 microprocessor, and lo and behold, you've got a fully functioning server, and you've taken the traditional server vendors out of the equation. Well, seeing all that capability move into the x86 microprocessor is very analogous to what we've seen happen in Wi-Fi chipsets. All this functionality that was implemented discreetly in the past has now been moved into the chipset. So I'm watching what's going on at Open Compute. And Open Compute was born because these big hyperscale guys wanted to make the advantages that they'd gained by doing this available to a much broader market. Clearly, what they did initially was hard. You had to go find a white box, get somebody to design it and build it for you, and then get code onto that thing and make it all operate. Your regular enterprise customer really wouldn't be comfortable with all that complexity, whereas the hyperscale guys were. Mm-hmm. So Open Compute formed to make all that advantage available to the broader market by driving standards, open standards around hardware. So that was a big inspiration for the whole white box trend in Wi-Fi. We really repurposed what happened in Open Compute for initially servers and then switching, data center switching to the edge of the network into Wi-Fi, because the core thing that allowed that to happen, which is abstraction of features into silicon, is exactly what's gone on in the Wi-Fi industry. So we really didn't invent anything new. Mm-hmm. We're just applying it to a different part of the market.
That same approach in server hardware now going into the Wi-Fi space, because it's one of the last remaining techs to follow suit.
Exactly.
So we could see the advantage of white box Wi-Fi for you guys as Mojo Networks, right? So you can focus on the software side, right? What would be the advantage of Wi-Fi, the white box Wi-Fi for the customer?
Cost. I mean, that's the whole reason that, the whole trend in the hyperscale data centers, it happened because they were spending too much money on data center infrastructure. So they drove this open hardware standards approach that now gave rise to Open Compute. So it all comes down to money and value. And when you talk to customers that are intelligent and understand the ecosystem below them and the supply chain below them and where the innovation happens, and you have a fundamental belief that value and margin belongs with people that are innovating, you see people get frustrated with traditional networking vendors that are charging a very high margin rate on products that they really didn't design and they definitely didn't manufacture, which is the way access points for the enterprise are built today.
Yeah, and I see a lot of groups of people, or mainly two groups of people. Ones who see some of these big vendors as the cost is way too high, it's unreachable for their organizations. And then they look into some of the lower cost vendors, but they don't quite have those same features that they're looking for in the enterprise grade, or some of those small guys are also enterprise quality. But here, what you're saying is you can create a white box AP, but still have the same kind of feature sets that you could for an enterprise environment. All those features are mainly driven through the cloud or through your dashboard that you guys provide.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So again, if an access point is defined by the chipset, at least in terms of core hardware functionality, and all the chipsets that power the world's access points are largely coming from Broadcom and Qualcomm, if you go to all the different ODMs in Taiwan and you source an access point, let's say, for instance, with a Qualcomm 802.11ac Wave 2 4x4 MIMO chipset, and you source that from 5 ODMs, that hardware platform is essentially going to be the same in terms of functionality. Now, you might have a different amount of RAM or flash in there, depending on what data you want to store in the access point and how much storage and memory you need to hold your firmware image. But there's really no difference in terms of the core functionality of the access point, as long as it's based on a specific chipset from one of the big Wi-Fi chipset vendors.
Yeah, because a lot of people will say that the hardware doesn't matter as much. It's all commoditized. But then you will have another group that says hardware matters quite a bit. Now, there is a certain tipping point there. I would say maybe the quality could be in the antennas of the hardware, but your differentiating factor, as long as you still invest in good hardware, you will differentiate yourself in the feature set that you provide in your dashboard in the cloud.
Yeah. And you're right. The quality of the hardware is important, both from a design and a manufacturing standpoint. But that is now almost completely driven by these very mature, sophisticated professional ODMs in Taiwan. I can tell you that not only Mojo, but the vast majority of the vendors that provide enterprise-grade Wi-Fi, the way they get a new access point, a hardware platform, is they put out an RFP that gives a spec that says this is what we want that access point to do. This is the 802.11 standard that we want. This is how much memory and storage needs to be in that AP, et cetera. They ship that RFP out to a bunch of ODMs in Taiwan. ODMs come back with a proposal. The Wi-Fi vendor picks one of the ODMs. The ODMs build some prototypes. The Wi-Fi vendor qualifies those. And they go into production assuming that they pass qualification. And the ODMs are very sophisticated when it comes to the periphery hardware design, like antenna design. Many of them own their own antenna companies. They are better than most Wi-Fi vendors now at antenna design because they've developed this capability over the years. They're very sophisticated, very talented engineers that are designing these hardware platforms.
Okay, so going back into the white box Wi-Fi itself for Mojo, what's driving the need for Wi-Fi, white box Wi-Fi, other than cost?
So there's really kind of two iterations. There's what I would call Gen 1 white box Wi-Fi, which is what we're pushing now. And essentially what we're doing is we're making access points available to our customers at the price that they come out of the factory in Taiwan or China, with no markup, no margin. So most Wi-Fi vendors will make 70 points of margin on an access point. If you go look at any publicly traded Wi-Fi company or networking company, they're typically between 65 and 70 points of gross margin. To get there, if you as a customer negotiated a really great, 60% off list discount, that means that the access point coming out of the factory, let's say, is $100. That's the ex-factory cost, coming out the door of a factory in China. You multiply that by 15, that's your list price, $1,500. And then when the Wi-Fi vendor gives you that really great 60% off list discount and you're paying $500 or $600 for the AP, they're still making 70 points of margin. So what we're doing is we're making those access points, again, to use that example, at $100 available to our customers for $100. We don't make any margin on these access points. And our customers can access the supply chain in a number of different ways. They can buy through traditional channel partners that will procure those access points from the factory at cost. Some of our larger customers will buy directly from the factories and not even take the margin that a channel would put on top of an access point. So we've made the concept of disaggregation. That's not a word I used before, but the concept of disaggregation is a word that's used in the open compute context all the time. And the idea is that you're buying hardware from one vendor and your software solution is coming from someplace else, another vendor or open source. So this is what we've implemented is a disaggregated business model. What we've done is we've disguised that from our customers so they don't have to deal with the hassle of placing a PO to some vendor they've never heard of in Taiwan to get an access point, and then a PO to Mojo for software and cloud services. We've hidden that complexity from a supply chain and business perspective from the end customer so they can enjoy a disaggregated economic advantage without the complexity of buying disaggregated.
Okay.
So now, let's say you're working on a new firmware version as Mojo Networks, and you're not sure that this new firmware version will be supported on the type of AP you have. How does it work? Do you ask the OEM to come up with a new AP, a new hardware, or do you send out hardware specifications to the OEM just to make sure that your firmware will be supported on the AP?
Correct. So this is back to kind of what I call Gen 1 of white box Wi-Fi or disaggregation. So the access points that are available to our customers that can be managed by the Mojo Cloud and Cognitive Wi-Fi are access points that we've qualified. We know for a fact that our code will be supported by those hardware platforms. And if a customer implements one of those in their network, they're going to work just fine with our system. They're fully qualified and certified. What we recently announced with EdgeCore is a couple of access points that are white box. They can be purchased from EdgeCore directly. EdgeCore is the sister company of Acton. Acton is a very large ODM in Taiwan that builds a lot of access points for a variety of Wi-Fi vendors under those vendors' brand names, but they also have their own branded products called EdgeCore. And if we've now announced 2 EdgeCore products that can be managed by the Mojo Cloud. Now, ironically or intentionally, those 2 access points are effectively identical to 2 Mojo access points because, once again, they're defined by silicon. We have a product called the C110, which is a Wave 2 2x2 MIMO, and we have a C120, which is a Wave 2 4x4 MIMO, both based on Qualcomm silicon. Well, the 2 EdgeCore APs are effectively exactly the same. They're a Qualcomm chipset, same memory and storage. They absolutely support our firmware stack. But if you as a customer negotiate a very good price from EdgeCore, or you have an existing relationship with EdgeCore and that's where you'd prefer to buy your hardware, you now have that avenue available.
Awesome. And when you talk about the pricing and being able to get the APs from EdgeCore and work directly with them, it sounds very disruptive in the market, right? So I'm assuming a lot of the big vendors don't like what you're doing because, like you said, they do take a big cut of the hardware, and with businesses nowadays being either being lean or having to save a lot of money elsewhere, hardware is usually where they turn. And so what a lot of people do is they don't deploy as many APs, right, for an environment. So if you're dealing with a high density environment, they might not be able to order as many APs as they need. And so when it comes to the design aspect of it, having that cost lowered from the hardware perspective is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so you're not losing anything in terms of the features. You still have those enterprise grade features. You have the security that you guys have. You have your algorithms for radio management, 802.11r, like all those features that you get in the standard, they're all there.
Exactly. So think about it this way. I fundamentally believe that margin and profit, at least in the technology space, belongs to the people that invent and innovate. We don't invent chipsets. We don't develop chipsets. We don't invent or develop access points. Like all the other enterprise Wi-Fi vendors, we put out an RFP and then go get them from an ODM in Taiwan. Mm-hmm. The ODMs and the chipset guys are the guys doing the innovation. That's where the profit and the margin belongs. It doesn't belong with us as a Wi-Fi vendor. So by not charging margin on access points, we've made no compromises in terms of the quality of that hardware, the functionality, the feature sets. What we've effectively done is we've taken what historically was that margin and we've given it back to the market. Mm-hmm. We've said, Mr. Chipset guy, you make your margin. Mr. ODM in Asia, you make your margin. But the profit margin that we as a Wi-Fi vendor used to make, because we're not doing any innovation in that area, we no longer deserve.
Right.
And just like the server guys got caught making too much margin on products where they weren't doing very much innovation, this industry is going to get caught. Mm-hmm. And rather than become a victim of that, we decided to lead the charge. And we effectively just gave all the hardware margin back to our customers, back to the market, because quite frankly, we don't deserve it because we're not innovating in those areas.
So because you're not innovating in those areas specifically, does that mean we're gonna see a lot more innovation within your product, within anywhere else outside of the hardware? Where do you see the innovation going to be? Where's it going to be in the next couple of years?
So for us, it's going to be in cognitive Wi-Fi. The whole point of the entire networking industry, not just Wi-Fi, but core networking, every aspect of it, It's basically to make sure users have secure, excellent experiences when they're online. That's the whole point of everything we do. So that's our core area of focus. And we do that in software. We rely on the chipset guys to do the hardware innovation, and we become the software experts. And that's where all of our R&D spend is focused now, is on software. It's on making Wi-Fi networks run more reliably, more seamlessly, with less trouble tickets and less hassles for network administrators. That's the whole end game. And we're doing that through cognitive Wi-Fi that I described a little bit earlier.
So we have EdgeCore as a partner for you guys to providing some of the white box APs. What are the basic requirements of a white box AP, and what are some of the features we could expect? Because I assume some white box APs might not be able to have all the features that Mojo provides in the dashboard or the cloud, or are we going to see full parity with all of the white box APs that you guys authorize or vet out?
So for now, you'll see full parity. We won't make a white box AP manageable by our cloud unless we can get full feature parity with the Mojo branded access points. So we've drawn that line. Now, the interesting thing is, because again, Wi-Fi, at least from an access point perspective, is defined by a chipset, it doesn't necessarily have to be a chip that shows up in what's a traditional ceiling mount, enterprise grade AP. We could put this chip in a gateway box. We could put this chip in a LTE small cell Wi-Fi combo box, which we've done already. So it's now you can put a Wi-Fi card traditionally in an access point that gets mounted in the ceiling, but it can go into other places where Wi-Fi lives and run the Mojo code stack. So this gives us all kinds of flexibility in the market, working with a variety of different kinds of customers that may want to implement Wi-Fi in customized ways. We've got customers today that not only buy access points directly from the factory, but they put their own enclosure with their own industrial design, their own look and feel, their own branding. And we'd be happy to do that with anybody. If we ran into a big enterprise or a big university that wanted to have, let's say, the Ohio State logo on all their APs, I don't care. I'd be fine. You can do anything you want from a physical enclosure perspective with this business model.
Yeah, because I was going to get to that. Because if you're going to have this white box capability, I assume people are going to, the next step is build your own access point, assuming they follow all the regulations when it comes to transmit power and anything else. But that opens up a lot of different possibilities there.
And it opens a lot of issues around regulatory. Absolutely. So this gets kind of now moving towards what I would call Gen 2. Of white box Wi-Fi. And this is the real, at least for me, the real dream that I'd love to see realized in the industry. And this is where we get to a point where access points from the different Wi-Fi vendors interoperate. The simple analogy here is a light bulb. I can buy any brand of light bulb from any store, bring it home, plug it in, and it's going to do what I expect it to do, which is light up my room. Wouldn't it be amazing for the customer base, for the entire market, if access points worked that way? If you could have a building full of one vendor's access points and try out another vendor's management system that you may want to use because it's better in some way. I run into so many customers that love cognitive Wi-Fi, that love our user interface, that love our entire solution, but they look at me and say, I've got a campus full of 10,000 access points and I've got no budget to tear all those out and replace them with Mojo APs or EdgeCore APs.
Yeah, that's a common problem for large environments.
Now, if you could go into an environment like that and leave the access points alone and change the management system, what an awesome thing that would be for the market. So now that opens up some questions. Now, technically, we already know how to do this. This has already been pioneered again once in Open Compute, and it was pioneered originally for white box switching. So we're back to disaggregation. I go buy some white box switch with no operating system, and I've got to go get an operating system on that switch. How do I know that operating switch is compatible? That operating system's compatible with that hardware platform. When I download it, is the switch going to boot? Is it going to work?
Yeah.
So there's a technology that was contributed to Open Compute, some open source software. It was contributed by Cumulus Networks called the Open Network Install Environment. And it's basically a bootloader technology that allows a system to self-discover an appropriate operating system from a variety of places, download an operating system that's compatible with that specific hardware platform, and then reboot as a fully functioning system. We've ported that ONIE bootloader code and technology into the access points. And this is exactly how we lit up the Open Compute Summit back in March with EdgeCore APs. We used the ONIE bootloader to download a Mojo firmware image and then bring up those access points to connect to the Mojo cloud and be fully manageable, and provide all the guest access at the Open Compute Summit that happened in March at the San Jose Convention Center. So the technology is there to do this. There's no technical reason why APs can't interoperate or be brain transplanted. Some of the open questions now come with regulatory approval, like FCC. Right. This is back to the Open WRT and all the problems that whole adventure created. So we haven't solved all these problems yet, but venues like Open Compute, the Telecom Infra Project, the Wireless Broadband Alliance, the Wi-Fi, these are all great venues to tackle these issues, and as a group of vendors come together and figure out how, if Mojo code was ported onto some competitor's AP, that would still be compliant with regulatory requirements.
Right. So there'll be some hurdles along the way, but I want to go back to, you just mentioned you had EdgeCore APs at the Open Compute Summit. So this was in production at an actual event where you had EdgeCore APs and Mojo APs?
Yeah. So the Open Compute Summit happens every year in March. This year it was at the San Jose Convention Center, and it's a relatively large show with a lot of people. And because the Open Compute is so committed to open hardware standards, they were very intrigued.
It kind of makes sense.
It kind of made sense, right? We were very philosophically aligned with Open Compute. So they gave us the opportunity to light up the guest Wi-Fi for that summit with EdgeCore APs running Mojo code, white box APs. And the experience for the users was fantastic. We had rave reviews from everybody that attended the conference that connected to Wi-Fi. They had phenomenal throughput, great performance. And we had the Mojo Cognitive Wi-Fi UI running in our booth at the show. So anybody that was interested could come by and look at all the data.
See it live in action.
Exactly.
So like you had your knock center at a booth.
In the show.
Like, what better way to show people that it works by saying, hey, you're on the actual network running white box APs alongside our APs. So I'm curious about how that was laid out. Do you put some of the EdgeCore APs in one section of the area and then your Mojo APs in a different section? Because I know in a design aspect, a lot of people will want to maintain the same kind of AP in, say, a building or a floor instead of sprinkling different versions of APs.
So again, what is the same kind of an AP? In today's world, it's defined by the chipset that's in there. How it looks really doesn't matter. It's the chipset. That's what defines an access point. So an EdgeCore AP and a Mojo AP that are both based on the same Qualcomm chipset are effectively the same AP. They may physically look different, but we did an RF plan for the show before it started. We figured out where to place all the APs. It's a typical, trade show environment with a very high ceiling. So we had some stands where we mounted APs at a reasonable height. And we did a mix of Mojo APs and EdgeCore APs, pretty much kind of salt and pepper scattered together. And we ultimately connected, I think, 3,400 people simultaneously at that show with that network, again, with phenomenal performance.
Wow, that's I didn't expect to hear that you have already in place in production. That was in production. This was an event where you had your white box AP and your own Mojo AP. So, I mean, it's already here.
It is here.
It's here.
We have customers deploying APs in the tens of thousands that have their brand on them. They're not even Mojo branded. These customers are buying them directly from factories in Asia. They're getting their own look and feel on the enclosure. They're putting their brand on the AP, and they're being managed by a Mojo Cloud.
And this is not something
about service providers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Service providers, great point, Pierre. Service providers, along with the hyperscale guys, seem to be the most advanced and familiar and comfortable with the whole concept of disaggregation. Mm-hmm. They've got such massive investments in data centers and infrastructure that there's so much money being spent that the economic advantages of disaggregation are so meaningful to those companies that they're embracing it. So when you talk about disaggregation, to many customers, they give you a quizzical look and wondering, what are you talking about? Whereas you go to
it's not your traditional model.
Exactly. But, if we go to Google or Facebook or Amazon and talk to their IT guys about this, they immediately understand it. Same with the big service providers.
Yeah. And you're just going to bring something that these guys are familiar with down to everyone else.
Out to the edge of the network. Yeah. Right.
Okay. And so looking at you, Mojo Networks, driving this, right? I don't know anyone else who's also driving this white box Wi-Fi. How do you get other vendors involved? How do you create, I guess, this community involvement or with people wanting to do the white box Wi-Fi and deploying it out there? How do you get other vendors to contribute?
So the way it'll happen is through customer pressure. I mean, typically when you do something this disruptive, when you initially debut it and you start to talk about it and prove that it works the way we have, you'll get ridiculed.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what the big guys will do that are threatened by this. They'll ridicule you. They'll tell you why it will never work. And then as time goes by, they're going to start to get on board because they're going to have no choice. It's the same thing that happened in the data center. This is learning from history, watching what already happened, and just seeing it creep out to the edge of the network. So in my mind, this is inevitable. So what will help accelerate this is customer pressure, is customers going to our competitors and saying, we've seen this happen in the data center. We've seen this happen with servers and switching. The same thing should happen with Wi-Fi. Why aren't you on board? So we have an ongoing open invitation to any other Wi-Fi vendor like EdgeCore to come work with us. I would love to have our access points interoperate with another vendor's access points. And if they would like to take advantage of our access points, our Clever 3 radio access points, we would happily make those available to another vendor that would like to be able to manage them with their management system. And I would love to be able to manage one of our competitors' access points with our system because it's clearly good for the market. It's good for the customers. It mitigates vendor lock-in. It reduces costs. It provides flexibility to the customer base. It's so obviously a good thing. What we're fighting against is the big established old school networking vendors preserving their old school business models where they made a ton of margin on hardware.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're not seeing that anymore with a lot of these companies. It's not in hardware anymore. It's more so in innovation and software, like you said.
Yep.
And so when you add these white box APs to Mojo Networks' cloud, what does that look like? How do you even, if I buy it from another vendor, from EdgeCore, how do you add that to the Mojo cloud?
So we'll collaborate with EdgeCore. So once we'll know, EdgeCore will let us know that you, for instance, want to buy 1,000 APs from them to plug into a Mojo cloud. We'll get all the serial numbers and MAC addresses before they're delivered to you. We'll pre-register them in the cloud. So the minute you plug them into a live Ethernet port, they'll immediately become visible in our UI.
Configuration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you manage them just like a Mojo Networks.
Exactly.
AP. Okay. I mean, that sounds too simple. Would you agree, Francois? Like, what do you think about adding third-party vendor APs to that are not Mojo Network APs to the dashboard?
Well, it's a very simple process, right? Transparent for the end user, which I like very much, right? Simplify the process. I had another question related to the previous questions. Now that, pretty much the Wi-Fi vendors will pretty much become software companies in this new, model. Aren't you afraid that other software companies like like Google or Facebook start to create their own Wi-Fi systems to manage their own Wi-Fi APs? Aren't you afraid that those companies will start taking market shares on the market, or what do you think?
Oh, that's a great point, Pierre. Good insight, because that's already happening. I mean, these hyperscale guys, the ones you just mentioned in particular, I mean, they're gonna vertically integrate and do what they want to do themselves. I mean, you've seen Google very publicly push a concept called OpenConfig. You may or may not be familiar with OpenConfig, but it's a standard way to manage a multi-Wi-Fi vendor network with a standard set of protocols and interfaces. So if you've got within a Google building a bunch of, vendor A, vendor B, vendor C Wi-Fi, OpenConfig allows that to be managed homogeneously. And you're seeing Google push that very aggressively. I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see them continue to vertically integrate and take control of their networking infrastructure. And
there's going to be companies that want to do that. I mean, those are the very large companies that need that kind of efficiency and control.
And have the technical prowess to do it. The vast majority of the market will never have the technical wherewithal to do this.
Yeah, so they'll want something that's easy to put into their network, that's cost effective, but then have the features that you have in your cloud.
And that works. That keeps the users happy, that mitigates the number of support tickets. You plug it in, it automatically learns, it automatically self-corrects, it keeps all your users happy, and you as an IT staff member just don't get any calls with people complaining about network performance or the Wi-Fi.
Now, you have a channel in place, right? Do you see that this kind of model puts a bad taste in the channel at all? If you're going to take away some of that margin from them?
That's a good question. And initially, when we introduced this business model a couple years ago, I was nervous about that. Mm-hmm. I was nervous just about how to practically even make it work, because the way it works now from a channel standpoint is we have our distributors buy the access points from effectively the factory, and we have them buy the cloud services from Mojo. So the distributors are purchasing our solution in a very unconventional way. Mm-hmm. And when we went to these big distributors and asked them to do this, I was worried they were going to say, no, this is too weird.
Yeah.
Right? I want to just go buy everything from my vendor the way I've traditionally always done this. Well, surprisingly, we've now had worldwide 25 or 30 distributors sign up to purchase this way. Mm. So they're literally, from an end user perspective, let's say you as a university network administrator, you place a PO for Mojo access points and Mojo cloud services with your reseller, just like you always have historically. That reseller then places that PO for that combined SKU of hardware and cloud services with their distributor. And then the distributor has this decoder ring where they can take that combined SKU and send a PO for a hardware SKU to essentially the factories in Asia, and they send the PO for the cloud services to Mojo. Mm-hmm. So that's where the disaggregation is happening in the supply chain. It's happening at the distributor level.
Yeah.
So the channel partners, the resellers, and the end users don't even know this is happening.
Okay.
They just get this remarkably good price for a state-of-the-art enterprise-grade, super high-quality AP, which clearly is a benefit for them, and it's one of the reasons that we're growing so fast.
Yeah, because you are disrupting across the whole board there. You're not just at a vendor to vendor level, but also to channels, channel partners, and everything in between. So,
yep.
But at the end, it's really the customer or user needs and wants that really drive this.
Exactly. If we don't have compelling technology, if our technology wasn't very compelling or interesting, it wouldn't matter if we priced it at zero. No one would buy it. It has to solve a real problem.
Right.
In this industry, you're never going to win on price. You're going to lose on price, but you're never going to win on price. Every time we go into an enterprise account, a large university, a big K through 12 school district, we're immediately dealing with very technically competent network administrators that are not asking questions about how much does your solution cost versus vendor B. They're asking, do you support all these features? Mm-hmm. Can you prove that your network will run reliably if I implement it in my institution, that my users are going to be happy, that you have all the features that I need? If you don't get through what I call the technical gatekeepers, you never even get to a pricing discussion. So we win on technical prowess, on the cognitive Wi-Fi and all the features that we provide. And then when we get through that part of the purchasing decision and we get to pricing discussions, if it's competitive, we'll never lose.
Yeah.
So related to the look of an AP, right now on the market, different vendors will have different AP looks, and it's kind of important for the aesthetics of it. If we have white box Wi-Fi APs, do you think the vendors will still have to be able to choose the look of the APs, or do you think all APs will look the same?
So I think for customers typically, if you go to the vendors in Asia and purchase APs directly, the minimum order quantity is typically 2,000 or 3,000. So if you as a customer can buy 2,000 or 3,000 APs at a time, you literally could design any look and feel and enclosure that you want. You could have a red AP, a pink AP, any logo you want on it. The enclosure is literally a plastic injection mold. So that would be entirely possible for larger customers, like, big campuses, mm-hmm. service providers. In fact, we're seeing service providers do this already, where they're customizing the external look of the AP. For the smaller customer that can't buy in these large quantities, we work with our ODMs to do industrial design, and it's largely a matter of aesthetics, and everybody's got their own tastes and opinions about how an AP should look, how it should blend into the ceiling. Yeah. And we do our
opinionated and heated discussions about it.
Exactly. And we do our best to balance all the feedback that we receive to design an AP that looks good. Mm-hmm. But we always welcome more feedback and more input on what customers want to see in terms of the physical appearance of an access point.
Okay. And when people...
Sorry, I was going to say, can you imagine having like a small customer buying APs without enclosures and then creating their own enclosure, like 3D printing the enclosure, something like that?
Oh, that's a good point. Like about building your own enclosures through 3D printing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be totally possible.
Yeah, that would be.
I'd love to work with somebody on that. That would be really fun.
You'd have to test those RF characteristics, Francois.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
because that would be another factor into it, especially if someone picks the wrong filament, right? Because you can get some.
You could pick the wrong plastic that could attenuate all your antennas.
When people are purchasing white box APs, but they're in your cloud, how does support work? So someone has maybe a potential issue with something. Mm-hmm. How do they go about getting support on the hardware and then also on the software side?
So it all comes from Mojo. We, as the management platform, consider ourselves as the one-stop shop for customer support. And that even applies to white box access points. So today, for the Mojo branded access points that are, again, sold in this disaggregated way, we provide a lifetime limited warranty on those APs with no RMA required. This goes back to the fact that they're so inexpensive that they don't even justify getting them back from a customer if the customer believes that the hardware has failed. So if you as a customer have a Mojo access point and it's not working, and our support people talk to you and agree that it's actually a defective piece of hardware, which is extremely uncommon, we'll just send you a new one for free, and you can do whatever you want with the one that failed. One of the reason that that's possible partly is because the access points are so inexpensive in our business model that it doesn't cost us very much to provide lifetime warranty. But the other benefit of watching all this functionality migrate into the chipset is there's just not many parts left in an AP that represent points of failure. So the reliability of access points today is remarkably high. Our field failure rates for hardware are incredibly low. And that's been running that way for years and years and years. We monitor this very carefully. So even if you, as a customer, purchased an EdgeCore AP and that piece of hardware failed, we would just send you a Mojo AP to replace it. And we'd get that EdgeCore AP back and then go talk to EdgeCore about it. But for you as an end customer, doesn't matter. We'll take care of you from a hardware and a software perspective.
That's great to hear, because I think that would be probably one of the number one questions people would have is, where do I go for support if I have multiple vendor APs running around, but the same software on the AP
Exactly.
itself?
This is one of the big concerns about disaggregation is not only do I not know where to go to get support, but what if the hardware guy blames the software guy and the software guy blames the hardware guy, and I as the customer are stuck in the middle with no resolution of my problem. We've taken that all off the table.
Okay.
Our philosophy is we as the management platform stand behind the entire solution, including the hardware. And if you bought white box hardware from someplace that's not Mojo like EdgeCore, we'll work with EdgeCore to get those problems solved and make sure that you don't end up getting stuck in the middle of a EdgeCore versus Mojo discussion on whose fault something was.
Okay. And to wrap things up, I wanted to bring up one more question into extensibility. When you have your Mojo APs and then your white box APs, is it possible to use APIs to get information off of these third-party APs and also build your own dashboards if you wanted to? I'm assuming yes, hopefully.
Absolutely.
All right.
We're probably the most advanced company in the industry when it comes to APIs. Our whole architecture is API-based. Our beautiful cognitive Wi-Fi UI, it's all API-driven. We have an API portal now up and running on our website.
Okay.
So we've got APIs documented. So you now, as a developer, can come develop on our platform. And we've got lots of people doing this already. We've seen all kinds of customers do all kinds of creative things with our platform that we would have never imagined possible. Some of the examples.
Do you have any examples?
Oh, sure. So I'll go from the boring to the intriguing. From the boring perspective, we've got big customers, service providers that integrate with their order management system, with their field provisioning system. So you've got, for instance, a service provider that may be using a truck roll to install an access point in a small business customer that they work with. Well, that technician on the truck may have a truck full of access points, and he won't know which one is going to which customer as he drives his route during the day. So through our APIs, we have an app that technician has on his phone where when he gets to the customer, he can scan the AP serial number and MAC address. It interfaces to that service provider CRM system and associates that specific AP with that specific customer ID. Boring, but very important from a business standpoint. We've got other customers that deploy a lot of access points on a frequent basis. They're deploying into a lot of branch offices that come up and go down. Think of, kind of not like pop-up stores, but something like that. And they have that whole workflow automated through our APIs where they can ship an access point out. The whole workflow is automated so that when it shows up at this temporary location, it comes up, it associates with the cloud, broadcasts the right SSID, and then when it comes down, it goes back into inventory and can be repurposed. One of the coolest use cases, and this one was amazing to me, is they did an API integration for the guests that were coming to a bar. And they use social login through our.
You said bar. I'm intrigued.
So we've got a whole guest management platform that allows you as a customer of Mojo's that if you're in a venue that's dealing with consumers, you can create a captive portal that advertises your establishment and allows your guests to log in through social media. So this particular customer had the guests logging in through Facebook, and then they could derive what music the customer may like based on their Facebook profile. And when that customer arrived, they would play that music on the jukebox or over the music system in the bar. And they actually, I think they were able to even correlate this to the average revenue per customer in terms of how much beer they were drinking, for instance. And it literally went up because they liked the fact that the music they liked was playing.
They just walked into an atmosphere that's for them. So the mood automatically goes up.
Exactly. So we see a lot of this kind of stuff going on in any of our customers that deal with consumers. It's this whole concept of guest intimacy. You know, how do I get my hotel guest to spend more when he's on the property? How do I get my guest that's coming into my grocery store to spend more time in the store and feel more welcomed by me as the grocer that's selling to that individual? So we see a lot of this going on in all the industries that deal with consumers.
You're tying in this engagement and a way for the network owner to somehow also make some profits out of it. It's another what some network engineers wouldn't like the term monetize, but I think that's a better way of monetizing on customers versus just collecting data and then selling it.
Exactly.
But driving away for a better experience. Like the next step for me would be if I walked into the bar, signed in on social, is have that beer ready for me at the counter.
Exactly. So it's really about building, you know, you can call it monetization, but it may not be direct. Right. It's really I call it, you know, guest intimacy or customer loyalty.
Yeah,
but those are better words. There's a million use cases. You know, you as the platinum member of some hotel chain, I've recognized that you've arrived on the property, and I'm going to send a clerk out to greet you in person and bring you to the front of the check-in line because you're a platinum member. There's a whole litany of
Francois says bring you a cookie.
Whatever. There's the imagination can run wild in terms of all the different things you can do when you're dealing with consumers, whether it's hospitality, you know, service-oriented retail, merchandise-oriented retail, gaming, whatever. There's just a huge number of ways to take advantage of Wi-Fi to build loyalty with your guests and the people that come spend money at your establishment.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for having me here at the Mojo Networks office. It was a pleasure talking with you about white box Wi-Fi. It's definitely, I think, a very big and different step for the industry. I will say it sounds like it'll be challenging, but I think that is the path where the industry is going. The hardware is not going to matter as much as the software. The software side is really going to make that differentiating factor there, but we don't discount the hardware because you still need good hardware in order to make that software run very well.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you again for having us here to talk about white box Wi-Fi. You did give us a link to share out with everyone. If they wanted to know more, you head over to mojonetworks.com/whiteboxwifi, and we'll also have more notes and some images of how this all looks in the dashboard. If you head over to our show notes, cleartosend.net/128, and we'll have more information there. So once again, thank you for joining us.
Pierre Rold, thank you very much for having me. It was an honor to be part of Clear to Send.
Okay. I will say it's Francois, not Pierre.
Oh, Francois, sorry.
No, that's fine. I was smiling the whole time, but no, it's fine. It's perfect. Right, Francois? It's okay?
Yes, yeah, I don't mind. It's a French name as well, right?
I feel terrible about that, Francois. I really do.
Don't worry, Ray.
No, don't worry about it.
You could call me Joe from now on.
Well, once again, head over to the show notes, cleartosend.net/128, or go to mojonetwork.com/whiteboxwifi for more information. So thank you for having us, and we'll see you guys at the next episode.